I don't mean to minimize other legislation, but what I'm saying is that when we come to this issue, we come to the core of how we've been established. We come to the core of how we treat the Constitution, as you heard from Representative Woog. So I think there are a few issues here that deserve illumination. I think the first is exactly that. It's a question of how do we interpret the Constitution? Is it a list of things like a menu in a restaurant where we say, well, we like a lot of this, and we think the First Amendment's really important because that's our freedom of speech, and so that's inviolate. That is absolutely never, ever going to be anything that we do about that. Second Amendment, I don't like as much maybe because, you know, it doesn't seem to be clear about modern day applications. The Fifth Amendment, why do we really need the Fifth Amendment? If you don't have anything to hide, why should you worry about it? How do we look through that list? How do we look through the very document that tells us the relationship between the people and their government? Because we are the government in this instance. I think that's a big question, and I think that many of us share what you heard from Representative Woog, that this document applies today as it applied then. It is one of the absolute miracles of the American experiment, is that the thoughtful consideration of what went into that document and how the Constitution marked out the relationship between the people and its government is entirely too important to mess with. And certainly too important to mess with when there are other questions that revolve around a bill such as this. We had a conversation, and Representative Neville is to be congratulated on really thinking about what is the need for the practical application of a law like this. And that means when confronted with a situation where law enforcement sees a weapon that is not stored properly, now what? Do we give them the latitude in law to make sure that they correct the action if what we heard yesterday is true, that what is desired is a change in behavior? Or do we really want to simply criminalize an action? Because those are two very different things. And this bill actually has a piece of it that is of terrible concern. What it says is we want to pass this law, and we really want this education component. Well, I don't want to pass this law. I think the education components we have today are just fine. But what this bill says is, but we're not going to pay for it. We're just going to pass this law, and then we're going to foist that responsibility out into the future somewhere. I don't find that acceptable. But when we really get down to what we've heard in this well and what we heard yesterday, I come back to exactly where we come back so often, and why I think it's important to remember the diversity of experience and the diversity of thought that exists on both sides of this aisle. Because when we consider a bill like this, and we hear stories about, well, what if you need that firearm to defend yourself or to defend your livestock? We look at this as if there was only one lens. But there are a number of lenses, and one of the biggest is exactly what we heard about earlier, which is a divide, a growing divide, between how things apply in urban Colorado and how things apply in rural and frontier Colorado. If what we meant when we took this oath is that we are here to do our job for the state as a whole, then that's where we need to step 2 steps back and say, how does this bill apply?